You don't belong here." That was the first thing Monsieur Alain Thibodeau said to Celestine. Not out loud, not in those exact words, but in the way he looked at her when she walked through the glass doors of the Harrington and Vale firm on that Tuesday morning in October. She wasn't a client. She wasn't lost. She was the new paralegal on the 14th floor, and Thibodeau was the senior partner who'd been there for 22 years, and the look on his face when she sat down at the desk beside the window. That look said everything his mouth didn't. If you've ever walked into a room and felt the temperature drop just because you entered it, you know exactly what Celestine Obi felt that morning. And if you've never felt that, well, stay with this story. Because what happened next is the kind of thing that doesn't make the news. It doesn't go viral, but it stays with people for the rest of their lives. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Fluently Tales. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming. We tell the stories that deserve to be told. Celestine Mirabelle Obi was 51 years old, and she had spent the better part of her adult life being underestimated by people who should have known better. She was born in Thunder Bay, Ontario, the youngest of 4 children. Her father, Emeka, had come from Enugu in the late 1970s with a suitcase, a degree in civil engineering, and an accent that made cashiers ask him to repeat himself 3 times before giving up and just nodding. Her mother, Gladys, was from Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Her family had been in Canada for 6 generations, longer than half the people who'd ever made Gladys feel like an outsider. Celestine grew up watching both of her parents work twice as hard for half the recognition. She watched her father redesign a bridge support system that saved the city $3 million, and then watch his name get left off the project report. She watched her mother teach grade 4 for 30 years, and then retire without so much as a proper dinner. So when Celestine decided, at the age of 47, to go back to school and get her paralegal certification, she did it quietly. She told almost no one. She studied at the kitchen table after her shift at the hospital records office ended at 7 p.m. She studied on the bus. She studied on her lunch breaks, with a sandwich in one hand and a highlighted copy of the Ontario Evidence Act in the other. She passed on her first attempt. She didn't celebrate. She just kept going. The job at Harrington and Vale came through a posting she almost didn't apply for. The firm was on Bay Street. Corporate law, primarily. Estate litigation, contract disputes, some immigration work. Celestine had spent 3 years at a smaller firm in Scarborough. Good work, honest work. But the commute was difficult and the pay was not keeping pace with anything. The Harrington and Vale posting asked for 5 years of experience. She had 3. She applied anyway. The interview was conducted by a woman named Rachel Ford, who was head of HR, and a junior partner named David Eulerin. They were professional. They were thorough. They offered her the position the following week. What they did not tell her, what no one told her, was that Alain Thibodeau had requested a different candidate. A young man from Osgood with 2 years of experience and a last name that would have looked comfortable on a Christmas card at a Bay Street firm. Celestine found out about this later. Much later. But on that first Tuesday morning in October, all she knew was that the senior partner walked past her desk, without acknowledging her, twice. And on the 3rd pass, he stopped, looked at the nameplate that Rachel had placed there the previous Friday, and said, in a voice that carried across the open office, "Housekeeping is on 12, not 14. The office went quiet. Celestine looked up from her screen. She had been cataloging exhibits for a file that needed to go to court the following Monday. She had been doing it with the kind of focused calm that comes from spending years doing careful, detail-oriented work in environments that don't exactly roll out the welcome mat. She looked at Thibodeau. He looked at her. "I'm aware," she said. "I'm the new paralegal. Celestine Obi. I believe you were CC'd on the welcome email." He said nothing. He walked away. A woman at the desk nearby, a junior associate named Priyanka, who would later become one of Celestine's closest friends at the firm, gave her a look that said, "I'm sorry. I've seen this before. I'm sorry." Celestine turned back to her screen. She was not surprised. She was not broken. She was, if anything, very, very tired. With the particular kind of tired that comes not from one incident, but but from a lifetime of incidents that all look like this one. But she kept going. Now here's what you need to understand about Alain Thibodeau. He was not stupid. That's the thing about people like him. They are often quite smart, in a narrow and airless kind of way. He had a reputation at the firm. He billed more hours than anyone on the 14th floor. He had a photographic memory for case law. His briefs were clean and precise, and courts trusted them. He also spoke 4 languages. This was something he mentioned regularly: English, French, Italian, and German. He had spent 2 years in Paris in his 30s, 2 years in Rome, and he considered himself, quietly and without ever quite saying so out loud, to be a man of significant cultural refinement. He spoke French in meetings when he wanted to exclude people. He did it casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, switching mid-sentence into French when someone he didn't respect walked into the room, continuing his conversation with a colleague as if the person who'd just entered simply wasn't there, wasn't worth the linguistic adjustment. It was a power move. Everyone knew it. No one said anything. Celestine knew it too. She had been watching him do it for 6 weeks by the time the Vachon estate file landed on her desk. The Vachon file was complicated. There was a family in Quebec, old money, 3 generations, a patriarch who had died intestate, and 4 children who each believed they deserved everything. There were properties in Montreal, in Charlevoix, and 1 in France. There were documents in French. There were legal instruments drafted in French. There were letters, handwritten, decades old, that were central to the dispute. The file came to Harrington and Vale because one of the Vachon children had married a Bay Street executive and had Bay Street connections. The partner assigned to the file was a woman named Catherine Bouchard, who was bilingual but stretched thin across 3 other files. She needed a paralegal who could handle the French documentation independently. She asked Rachel Ford for a recommendation. Rachel Ford walked to Celestine's desk. "I need to ask you something," Rachel said, "and I want you to be completely honest with me." "I always am," Celestine said. The Vachon file has extensive French documentation. Quebec civil law, correspondence in French, historical records. How comfortable are you with legal French? Celestine thought about her father, who had spoken French at home sometimes. Not fluently, but lovingly. The way people speak a language they admire. She thought about her mother's family, who had been francophone for 2 generations before the shift to English, who still had cousins in Cheticamp and Pomquet. She thought about the 2 years she had spent, in her 30s, in Montreal, working at a medical records office, while her then-husband finished his residency. She thought about the evening classes she had taken there, the conversations she had practiced, at the kitchen table, the French radio she had listened to every morning while she made breakfast. She thought about the legal French module she had added to her paralegal certification. Elective, not required, something she had done because it seemed useful, and because she has always been the kind of person who does the thing that seems useful even when no one is watching. "I'm comfortable," she said. Rachel nodded. "I'll let Catherine know." The meeting was on a Thursday. Catherine Bouchard laid out the file on the boardroom table. Thick folders, flagged documents, a timeline that stretched back 40 years. She walked Celestine through the key issues. The dispute hinged on a series of letters written by the patriarch, Gerard Vachon, to his eldest daughter in the 1980s. The letters were in French. The content, if interpreted correctly, could determine the disposition of 2 properties worth collectively around $4 million. "I need someone who can read these carefully," Catherine said. "Not just translate the words. Understand the register, the formality, what he was actually saying versus what a surface reading would give you." Celestine picked up the first letter. She read it. She read the second. She set them down. "He's not making a promise," she said. "He's expressing an intention. There's a difference, and in Quebec civil law, that difference matters. He uses je songe à, not je m'engage à. He's thinking about it. He's not committing." Catherine Bouchard looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," Catherine said. "Exactly." Celestine did not say, "I've been in this building for 6 weeks and no one has looked at me the way you're looking at me right now." She did not say, "This is all I've ever wanted. To be seen doing the work." She just nodded and picked up the third letter. She was in that boardroom for 4 hours. She did not notice, when she arrived, that Alain Thibodeau had passed the glass wall twice. She did not notice the second time he stopped and looked through the glass at her, at the documents spread in front of her, at Catherine Bouchard leaning across the table to look at something Celestine was pointing to. She found out later, from Priyanka, that he had stopped a third time, that he had stood at the glass for almost a minute, that his expression had been very difficult to read. The break happened on a Friday 3 weeks into the Vachon file. There was a meeting in the large boardroom, not a client meeting, an internal one. The Vachon file had grown, and now involved a Paris-based solicitor, a Quebec notary, and a conference call that required everyone to be in the same room. Catherine Bouchard was there. 3 associates were there. Celestine was there, with her notes and her flagged folders. Alain Thibodeau walked in at the last minute with his legal pad. He had not been invited. He had inserted himself, which was something he did occasionally when a file began to attract attention. He sat at the head of the table. Catherine, who was technically leading the file, said nothing. This too was something that happened regularly. Everyone understood the architecture of power in that room, and everyone accepted it except the people it was designed to exclude. The call connected. The Paris solicitor came on the line, a man named Maître Édouard Gagnon, who spoke quickly and with a strong Parisian accent, and who immediately began speaking in French. Rapid, formal, legal French. The kind that even fluent speakers sometimes have to slow down for. Thibodeau leaned back in his chair. This was his moment. This was where he became indispensable. He began to translate, speaking over the call, summarizing in English for the room. He summarized the first point accurately enough. He summarized the second point and missed something, a conditional clause that changed the meaning significantly. Celestine wrote a note on her pad. She pushed it across the table to Catherine Bouchard. He said, provided the original codicil is recovered. Not if a codicil exists. The condition is already met, or he believes it is. Catherine read the note. She looked at Celestine. Then she looked at Thibodeau. Thibodeau was still speaking, still translating, still holding the room. Alain, Catherine said. Hold on a moment. He stopped. Celestine. And Catherine used her name, just like that, the right pronunciation, the weight of it. Can you clarify what Maître Gagnon just said about the codicil? The room turned. Thibodeau turned. Celestine looked at the phone in the center of the table. She looked at her notes, and then she spoke. In French. Directly to Maître Gagnon. Clean, clear, unhurried legal French. The kind that comes from reading documents at a kitchen table, from morning radio, from evening classes, from years of careful attention. Maître Gagnon. Pourriez-vous préciser ce que vous entendez par à condition que l'acte codiciliaire original soit retrouvé? Croyez-vous que ce document existe déjà, ou parlerez-vous d'une condition hypothétique? There was a pause on the line. And then, Maître Gagnon, who had been speaking to a room of Bay Street lawyers for 20 minutes, and had perhaps adjusted his expectations accordingly, said, in French, with something that sounded like genuine relief, that yes, he believed the codicil existed. That the family's notary in Charlevoix had confirmed its existence 3 weeks ago, and that this changed the entire legal posture of the case. Celestine translated this for the room. The room was quiet. Thibodeau had set his pen down. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Catherine, on her notes, on the phone. She kept going, asking Maître Gagnon 2 more clarifying questions, confirming dates, confirming the name of the Charlevoix notary, writing everything down in her careful, looping handwriting. When the call ended, Catherine Bouchard said, "Thank you, Celestine. That changes everything." One of the associates said, "Wow." Priyanka, from across the table, said nothing. She just looked at Celestine with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was something better. Thibodeau picked up his legal pad. He left the boardroom without saying a word. Like and subscribe if you're still with us. This is the part of the story where it would be easy to say it all resolved neatly. It didn't. Real life doesn't work that way. But keep listening. The weeks that followed were different. Not dramatically different. Not the kind of different you'd make a movie about, but different in the small daily way that matters most. People began stopping at her desk, not to redirect her to the wrong floor, to ask questions, to hand her files, to say, "Can you take a look at this?" A junior associate named Rowan asked her to review his summary of a Quebec succession law case because, he said, "I just want to make sure I'm reading the French right." She read it. She found 2 significant errors. She fixed them without fanfare. Catherine Bouchard began including her in file reviews as a matter of course. Thibodeau did not speak to her for 11 days. On the 12th day, he stopped at her desk with a file under his arm. She looked up. He set the file on her desk. "There's a contract here," he said, "drafted in French. I need someone to go through it carefully." He paused. "Catherine says you're the right person." He did not apologize. He did not acknowledge what had happened in the boardroom. He did not say anything that could be described as a reckoning. But he had come to her desk. He had set the file down. He had said Catherine's name like a man citing an authority he now accepted, even if he couldn't quite say so out loud. It wasn't enough. It was not close to enough, as justice goes. But it was something. Celestine took the file. "I'll have notes to you by end of week," she said. He nodded and walked away. She watched him go, and she thought about her father, who had redesigned a bridge and never seen his name in print. She thought about her mother, who had taught 3 decades of children to love reading, and whose retirement dinner was attended by 11 people in a church hall in Antigonish. She thought, "I am not doing this for him. I was never doing this for him." The Vachon file resolved 6 months later. The codicil was found in a notary's office in Bay St. Paul, in a filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in 20 years. The property in Charlevoix went to the second daughter, as the patriarch had intended. The Paris property went into a trust for the grandchildren. It was a clean resolution, the kind that doesn't happen as often as it should. Catherine Bouchard wrote Celestine a formal commendation letter. It went into her file. It was, in the language of Bay Street law firms, significant. What mattered more to Celestine was something smaller. There was an articling student at the firm. A young woman named Adana, 24 years old, first generation, the daughter of a woman who had cleaned office buildings in North York for 15 years. Adana was brilliant, and she was terrified, and she walked into every room as if she was waiting to be told she was in the wrong one. Celestine recognized it immediately. She invited Adana for coffee. Not in the firm kitchen where everyone could watch and the power dynamics of the floor were still very much in operation. She invited her to the cafe on the ground floor, and they sat for 45 minutes, and Celestine told her some things. She told her about the paralegal certification, and the kitchen table, and the bus. She told her about the legal French module that no one had asked her to take. She told her about the Vachon file, and the boardroom, and the phone call, and she told it without drama, just as one set of facts following another. She told her, "The work is the thing, not the room, not the nameplate, not what anyone projects onto you when you walk through the door. Do the work so well that you become the only possible answer to the question they're asking. That's the only leverage that actually lasts." Adana listened. She didn't say much. At the end, she said, "Did it ever get easier?" Celestine thought about it. "No," she said. "But I got better at carrying it, and some days that's the same thing." Adana articled for 8 months. At the end of her articling term, she was offered an associate position. She took it. On her first day as an associate, she sent Celestine a message. 2 lines. "I kept the notepad from our coffee meeting. The one where you wrote down the name of the Charlevoix notary. I've had it on my desk this whole time." Celestine read the message at her kitchen table, on a Thursday evening in March, with a cup of tea getting cold beside her laptop. She sat with it for a moment. Then she picked up her tea and took a sip, and she thought, there it is. That's the thing that lasts. There's something people don't talk about enough when they talk about this kind of story. They talk about the moment. The boardroom, the phone call, the silence from a man who thought he knew everything about the room he was standing in. That moment matters. Of course it does, but it's not the story. The story is everything that came before it. The kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. The bus. The elective module. The 30 years of watching her parents do extraordinary work and receive ordinary acknowledgement. The 6 weeks of walking past a man who looked through her like she was furniture. All of that. Every quiet, unseen, unrecorded hour of it. That's what was in the room on that Friday when she picked up the phone and spoke. Most of the people who matter in this world are invisible to the people who think they run it. The woman doing the intake forms, the man who keeps the records current, the person in the office who reads everything carefully before anyone else in the room has opened the second page. They are there. They have always been there. And one day, not every day, not as often as it should happen, but one day, the room goes quiet, and then they speak. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today, because these are the stories that deserve to travel further than one screen. This has been Heirloom Tales. We'll see you in the next one.